I never thought a family barbecue would turn into a federal investigation. But that's exactly what happened the day my daughter-in-law brought a notary to my backyard. My name is Edward Harris. I'm a retired federal judge, 68 years old, recovering from a triple bypass, and still learning how to live in a house that feels too quiet since my wife Margaret passed last fall. You'd think that after 30 years on the federal bench, I'd be able to recognize trouble before it reached my doorstep. But grief does strange things to a man. It dulls your instincts, makes you believe people mean well when they don't, especially when that person is family. Melissa, my son's wife, had always been polite, a little distant, but never openly cruel. After Margaret's funeral, she started visiting more often. At first, I thought she was checking in out of kindness. She'd bring casseroles, ask about my recovery, even offer to help with bills. But slowly, her questions started changing. How much is this house worth? Now, Dad, she'd ask, running her fingers across the marble countertops Margaret had chosen years ago. Over $1 million, right? I didn't think much of it then. Denver real estate prices have been climbing for years. But something in her tone, too curious, too calculating, stuck in my mind. See, this house isn't just brick and wood. It's a lifetime. Margaret and I bought it in the 90s for $180,000 when we could barely afford the down payment. We painted every wall ourselves. We planted the maple tree in the yard the day our daughter was born. Every corner holds a piece of us. Selling it was never an option. But Melissa saw things differently. To her, I was just an old man, lonely, forgetful, easy to convince. She thought she could wrap her greed in concern and call it love. The real shock came one sunny afternoon during our Memorial Day barbecue. The grill was smoking, kids were laughing, and neighbors were gathered with plates full of ribs and corn. It was supposed to be one of those comforting, all-American summer moments. Then a stranger walked through my gate, carrying a leather briefcase and a calm smile. "Mr. Harris," he said, "I'm here for the notary appointment." I froze. A notary? At my barbecue? Melissa stepped forward with that tight smile she used when she was hiding something. "Oh, who'd you made it?" she said. "Dad, this will only take a minute." That's when the air shifted. Conversation stopped. You could feel the tension rolling off the table like smoke from the grill. I had a feeling something bigger was happening, something Melissa didn't expect me to see. What she didn't know was that the man standing in my backyard wasn't just a notary. He was Special Agent Ryan Cooper from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. And this wasn't just a barbecue anymore. It was a sting operation. After Margaret passed, the silence in my house became a kind of noise. Every creak in the floorboards, every empty chair, every photo on the wall whispered her absence. I was recovering from heart surgery, moving slower than I used to, and the world felt heavier in every sense. That's when Melissa started showing up more often. At first, I told myself she meant well. She'd stop by with takeout water, the plants ask about my medication. She even started organizing the mail and taking pictures of bills so she could help keep track. I wanted to believe it was kindness, but looking back, I realize she wasn't documenting my health. She was inventorying my assets. That's how these things often start. Not with shouting or threats, but with small acts of help. She began taking photos around the house, talking about repairs, noting property details. One day, she pointed her phone toward the framed deed above my desk and smiled. "It's amazing how much this place must be worth. now she said, like it was a compliment. But her tone carried something else, a quiet calculation. When people are grieving, they don't see predators coming. You tell yourself they're just trying to help. You ignore the comments that make your stomach twist. Melissa started using phrases that didn't sound like her. You've been through a lot. You shouldn't live alone. You seem different lately. At first, I thought she was just concerned, but each time she said it, I felt a little more like I was being placed in a box labeled incompetent. Grief has a strange way of dulling your defenses. I was a federal judge for 3 decades. I'd seen every kind of fraud, every trick in the book. But I didn't see this one coming because I never expected it to come from family. Melissa's visits grew more strategic. She'd bring brochures for assisted living options, casually dropping them on my dining table between slices of pie and polite smiles. "It's just a suggestion," she'd say, tapping the glossy picture of a cheerful senior holding a cup of tea. "You'd have people looking after you." I'd nod, trying to keep the peace. But inside, something was starting to itch, an old instinct, the one that told me when a witness was lying on the stand. Then came the conversation that finally cleared the fog. She stood in my kitchen, pretending to admire the new appliances, and said, "You know, Dad, this house has to be worth what, over $1 million now?" I told her yes, about $1.2 million, though I wasn't sure why I was answering. Her smile that day wasn't the kind you give someone you care about. It was the smile of a person who sees an opportunity. People like Melissa don't need to break into your home to steal from you. They just need you to trust them. They prey on exhaustion, on confusion, on the hope that someone still cares. They wait until you're too tired to double-check the fine print. I should have realized what she was building, a story. A story where I was the frail old man who'd lost his grip on reality. One she could tell my son, our neighbors, maybe even the courts if she needed to. And once that story was believed, all she'd need was my signature on a few sheets of paper to make it real. The worst part wasn't that she wanted the house. It was that she wanted to erase my role in it, erase everything. Margaret and I built everything we sacrificed for. That house wasn't just equity. It was a promise. It was meant for my daughter, for my grandson, for the people who would carry our family's name long after I was gone. That's the thing about grief. It makes you vulnerable to people who mistake your silence for weakness. But it also teaches you something powerful, how to listen closely again. When Melissa said I was different, she was right. I was different. I was starting to see her clearly. And once I did, I knew exactly what to do next. Looking back, the warning signs were obvious. They always are, once you know what to look for. The first red flag came on a quiet Tuesday. Melissa arrived with a stack of glossy brochures and that too sweet smile that meant she'd already decided what was best for me. She spread the pamphlets across my dining table like evidence at a trial. They were all for senior living communities, places with smiling nurses, bingo nights, and spotless kitchens. "Just take a look," she said. "You'd have your own room, people to help with medication. No stress about cooking or cleaning." I told her I wasn't ready to live somewhere that smelled like disinfectant and boiled carrots. She tilted her head as if speaking to a confused child. "It's not about readiness, Dad. It's about safety. You've changed since the surgery." Changed. That word stayed with me. It was the same tone prosecutors used when they thought a witness was cracking. I had survived open-heart surgery, not lost my mind. But she kept repeating it, Every visit, every conversation like a subtle campaign to convince the world I was slipping. The second red flag came a few weeks later. I walked into my study one morning and caught Melissa standing by my file cabinet, phone in hand, snapping photos of my tax records. When she noticed me, she didn't even flinch. "Just updating our family records," she said, calm as ever, the way a practiced liar keeps her heartbeat steady. That's when something in me switched on. Old instincts never die. Judges learn to sense when truth walks out of the room. I didn't confront her right away. I just noted the date, the time, the exact words she used. Years of court procedure had taught me that evidence speaks louder than anger. The third red flag hit like a gavel. Early May, she showed up with my son Mark. They sat across from me at the same table where Margaret and I had planned our retirement. Mark looked nervous, rehearsed. Melissa looked confident. "Dad," he began, "we've been talking. Maybe it's time to sell the house. It's too much for you to handle." Before I could respond, Melissa jumped in. "The market's great right now. I can manage the sale myself, no commission. It would be a family favor." A favor. That word had cost people their freedom in my courtroom. I watched her face carefully. The eager eyes, the strain around her mouth, the way she leaned forward like she was closing a deal. I asked where I'd live after this generous favor. She smiled. "You could stay with us until you find something smaller." It was a plan already in motion, not a suggestion. I could feel the walls closing in the quiet manipulation, the soft pressure dressed up as concern. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table surrounded by 30 years of memories. The walls that once held laughter now held secrets. 3 red flags, 3 moments that might seem small to anyone else. But together, they painted a clear picture. Someone I trusted was building a case to take everything my wife and I had worked for. And this time I decided I wasn't going to be the easy target. After that third red flag, I stopped pretending nothing was wrong. Years on the bench had taught me one thing above all: when something feels off, it usually is. Still, I didn't confront Melissa directly. You don't stop a snake by stomping your foot, you wait for it to slither into the open. So, I started quietly preparing my defense. The first thing I did was make a few calls to old friends at the federal courthouse. Not the ones who'd smile and give polite sympathy, but the ones who'd been in the trenches with me. Men and women who'd seen the same kind of deception I was beginning to see at my own dinner table. When I said my name, they went silent for a beat. "Judge Harris." "It's been a while." "Yes," I told them, "but I think I might need your advice. Something isn't sitting right." It's funny how quickly the old instincts come back. Within a week, I had a short list of what needed to be done. The first step wasn't about lawyers or police. It was about proof. Real, documented, verifiable proof. Melissa had started whispering to neighbors that I was forgetting things. She hinted to my son that I might be slipping mentally. I could almost hear her building the narrative. Poor old Edward, losing track of reality in need of someone to manage his affairs. If that story ever reached a courtroom, the only thing that would matter was evidence. So, I decided to collect it myself. I called my doctor, Dr. Laura Jenkins, the cardiologist, who had overseen my surgery. I told her I wanted a full cognitive evaluation, not because I doubted myself, but because I knew someone else would. She agreed right away. A week later, I sat in her office answering questions, reciting word sequences, identifying patterns, solving small puzzles designed to trip up anyone with early dementia. When the test ended, Dr. Jenkins smiled. "Edward," she said, "your cognitive function is better than most 50-year-olds. Whatever story someone's trying to write about you, it won't hold up." That single sheet of paper with her signature became my first line of defense. I placed it in a fireproof folder inside my desk. The next step was documentation. In Colorado, recording a conversation is legal if one person in the room consents, and that one person could be me. So I went online, ordered a small digital recorder, and tucked it under a stack of papers in my study. I also began keeping a written log every visit, every conversation, every questionable remark. At first it felt strange, almost paranoid, but every entry gave me clarity. Dates, times, tone of voice. Little pieces of truth that would later fit together like a puzzle. I wasn't just protecting myself. I was building a case the same way I had for decades, methodically, quietly, without emotion. And as I worked, something unexpected happened. The fear began to fade. It was replaced by focus. I wasn't just an old man waiting for someone to steal his house anymore. I was a judge again, doing what I'd always done, pursuing the truth. Melissa thought she was the only one running a plan. She didn't realize she had just stepped into mine. By late May, I'd gathered enough red flags to decorate a parade. Melissa's visits were getting shorter, but her intentions sharper. Every time she walked through my front door, I could feel her sizing up the house like a buyer at an open house. She'd stand in the living room running her hand across the banister Margaret had polished for decades and ask how I was managing all this space. I knew exactly where this was going. That's when I made a call I hadn't expected to make again. I reached out to Ryan Cooper, my former bailiff, back from my days in the federal courthouse. The last time we'd spoken was nearly 15 years earlier, when he'd left to join the FBI. He was young, back then, sharp-eyed and idealistic. I had written his recommendation letter myself. When he answered, his voice carried the same steady confidence I remembered. "Judge Harris," he said, sounding both surprised and concerned. "It's just Edward now," I told him, "but old habits die hard." We talked for a few minutes, catching up in that formal, cautious way men do when they're circling something serious. Then I told him about Melissa, about the pictures she took, about the whispers that I was different, about the way she kept bringing up power of attorney forms like she was suggesting a new TV plan. Ryan didn't interrupt. He listened, and I could hear his breathing slow, the sound of someone shifting from conversation to investigation. When I finished, he said quietly, "Sir, I think your daughter-in-law might be part of something bigger." He explained what he'd been working on, a long-term FBI investigation into real estate scams targeting elderly homeowners. The pattern was chillingly precise. It started the same way every time a health crisis, a recent loss, or a surgery. Then came a family member or caregiver who began raising doubts about the victim's mental capacity. Slowly, they'd maneuver control through a power of attorney, sell the property below market value to avoid scrutiny, and pocket the profit. Listening to him, I felt both rage and recognition. "So, she fits the profile I said." "She fits it exactly," Ryan replied. "The only thing missing is evidence. We need her to attempt the crime in a way that can be documented under federal law." He outlined what the Bureau called a legal bait setup, a plan that doesn't trap someone, but lets them reveal their true intent under lawful conditions. The trick wasn't to stop Melissa too early. It was to let her take one step too far in front of witnesses. Ryan's voice was calm but direct. "We'll handle everything on our end, but we need you to stay in character. Act as you have been polite, trusting, a little uncertain. She needs to think she's still in control. That wasn't hard. I'd spent months letting her believe that. He continued, she'll likely try to make it official soon. A power of attorney, maybe a medical declaration. When she does, she'll need a notary to validate it. That's where we come in. Meaning, I asked. The next notary she calls won't be who she thinks it is, Ryan said. We'll send one of ours an undercover federal witness. Every document, every word will be recorded. When she makes her move, we'll have everything we need. For a moment, I didn't say anything. The thought of turning my own backyard into a federal operation felt surreal. But then I remembered Margaret's words from years ago. When something threatens your family, you don't freeze, you act. Ryan promised to coordinate the details quietly. We'll set up surveillance in the area. Nothing obtrusive. Just stay patient, sir. You've already done more than most people in your position could. After the call ended, I sat at my desk looking at the folder that now contained my medical evaluation, the log of her visits, and my growing pile of recorded conversations. It hit me that this wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about every senior, every widower, every vulnerable person who's ever been told they were confused just because someone else wanted what was theirs. Melissa thought she was playing a game of manipulation. She didn't realize the board had changed, because now every move she made was part of an FBI investigation. Once Ryan and I agreed on the plan, everything moved quietly but fast. He told me what to expect and what not to say. He explained the role of patience. In his line of work, patience is the difference between a case that holds up in court and one that crumbles on a technicality. They created a simple, believable cover, an online profile for a small mobile notary service called Liberty Legal Services went live. Professional website, plausible phone number, clean logo. It looked exactly like the kind of quick, friendly service someone would call for a house visit. When Melissa booked the appointment, she would think she'd done it herself, just another errand crossed off her list. On my side, the job was to keep things normal. I kept grilling, kept laughing at the kids, kept asking neighbors about their plans for summer. The FBI handled the rest. Ryan's team parked a surveillance van a few houses down. Agents took positions behind hedges and rental cars in plain sight, disguised as delivery drivers. They wore body cams and had audio gear ready. It all felt like a movie, but the stakes were painfully real. We also needed witnesses, real people who would see and remember what happened. So I called friends and neighbors, Mrs. Alvarez from next door, who's sharp as a tack, the Millers across the street, a few cousins who lived nearby. I told them we were having a family barbecue and asked if they'd come by. Nothing more. I didn't tell them about the notary or the FBI. I didn't want anything between what they saw and what happened that afternoon. On the day itself, everything was arranged to look ordinary. Lawn chairs, potato salad kids with red juice on their shirts. Melissa arrived with a manila envelope, like she'd been preparing for weeks. She moved as if she were checking off steps on a plan. The notary we'd set up showed up on time. Neat suit, leather briefcase, the type of person you trust to make things official. What Melissa didn't know was that the notary was Agent Ryan Cooper in plain clothes. He carried an official badge under his paperwork and a recorder in his briefcase. The surveillance van had already recorded Melissa showing the documents to neighbors earlier that morning. The cameras on the agents captured her rehearsed lines, the way she insisted on urgency, the little smile she gave when she thought no one was looking. The key to the sting wasn't trickery. It was legality. The FBI wasn't entrapping her. They were giving her the exact tool she needed to expose herself. If she truly believed I was incompetent and tried to use the power of attorney to take control, she would do it in front of witnesses and under the eyes of an undercover federal agent. That would create the documentary evidence prosecutors need. I watched it all unfold from my seat at the picnic table, heart ticking fast, but mind steady. A sense of calm came over me. I wasn't alone in this. The neighbors were there. The cameras were rolling, and the law was on my side. When Melissa began to present the form speaking in that practiced tone about my decline, she thought she was about to win. Instead, she was walking into a net woven with patient planning and solid proof. That afternoon felt ordinary and extraordinary at once. The backyard smelled of barbecue and lawn clippings, but beneath it was a quiet kind of justice, putting itself into motion. As the plan moved closer to the day of the barbecue, Melissa's confidence turned into impatience. She was running out of time, and from the way she acted, running out of money. The more desperate she became, the bolder her tactics grew. One morning, my neighbor Mrs. Alvarez came over holding her phone. "Edward, have you seen this?" she asked, showing me a Facebook post from Melissa. It read, "Pray for my father-in-law. His dementia is getting worse. We might have to make some difficult family decisions soon." There it was, in plain sight, a public seed of doubt, meant to make her story seem real before she even showed the papers. It wasn't just social media. Over the next few days, 2 neighbors mentioned that Melissa had spoken to them privately, asking if I'd seemed confused or forgetful lately. She offered one of them a $50 thank you for confirming it. He didn't take the money, but he told me about it right away. That conversation became a new entry in my growing log, a detail I knew the Bureau would appreciate. Melissa thought she was tightening her case against me. In truth, every lie she told was turning into evidence for mine. I spent the next several nights preparing like I used to before a major hearing. I organized every document that could possibly matter: mortgage statements dating back to the 90s, tax records, home insurance papers, even the receipts from renovations Margaret and I had done over the years. Everything went into a labeled binder. Then I made copies, 2 sets. One for the FBI, one for me. Beside those files, I kept my handwritten journal. It had grown thick with notes, each date Melissa visited, what she said, how long she stayed, what rooms she photographed. Reading it back, I could see the full picture of her manipulation forming like a timeline of betrayal. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was proof. The night before the barbecue, I walked through the house alone. The silence was heavy, but it didn't feel empty this time. It felt ready. I looked around at the framed photos of my family, at Margaret's handwriting still on sticky notes in the pantry, and felt something I hadn't felt in months: control. Melissa had spent weeks trying to convince others that I was losing my mind. What she didn't realize was that I was documenting hers. Every rumor, every post, every bribe was now a part of a legal case that would outlive her lies. By the time the sun came up the next morning, the plan was airtight. The house was clean, the yard was set, and the evidence folder was locked in my desk. The clock was ticking toward 2:30. Soon, Melissa would walk through that gate thinking she was about to win. She had no idea that every word she spoke would bring her one step closer to losing everything. The day of the barbecue arrived clear and warm, the kind of afternoon that makes you forget the world can be cruel. The grill was going, neighbors were laughing, and kids ran barefoot through the grass. Everything looked normal. That was the point. At 2:30 sharp, Melissa appeared dressed a little too formally for a backyard cookout. She carried a thick manila envelope under her arm. Her husband, my son Mark, followed a few steps behind, eyes down, face tight. I could tell he knew something was off, but didn't understand what. Melissa scanned the yard, her gaze flicking between the crowd and the house. When she finally spotted me, she smiled like a real estate agent closing a sale. "Dad, do you have a minute to go over some paperwork?" she asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Conversations around us slowed. People turned curious. I motioned for her to sit. "Right here's fine," I said. "No secrets at a family barbecue." That seemed to throw her off for a second, but she pressed on. She opened the envelope and began laying out forms across the picnic table. The words at the top of the first page made my stomach twist, even though I'd been expecting them power of attorney. She started her pitch like a seasoned professional. "This just gives us the ability to help manage things, if you're ever confused or unable to make decisions," she said, her voice soft and practiced. "It's standard legal language, nothing to worry about." Then I read the document aloud. The more I spoke, the quieter the yard became. It said that I, Edward Harris, being of diminished mental capacity, due to age-related cognitive decline and medical trauma, granted full authority over my financial, medical, and real estate decisions to Melissa Harris. My voice didn't shake, but my hands did. Around us, people stopped pretending not to listen. When I finished reading, the silence was heavy enough to feel. I looked up at her and asked calmly, "Melissa, where did this come from?" "It's just a standard form," she said, still forcing that polite smile. "Everyone does this for safety." "Who prepared it?" She hesitated. "A legal service. I don't remember the name." "You don't remember who drafted the document that gives you ownership of my house and control of my bank accounts?" I asked, letting my voice carry just enough for everyone to hear. Her eyes darted to Mark, then to the so-called notary, standing beside her, the undercover agent Ryan Cooper, who was quietly observing everything. He looked professional and detached, the perfect image of neutrality. I leaned forward, keeping my tone steady. "Melissa, tell me, what exactly do you think I can't manage property taxes? Last year, they were $4,812. Insurance. I've never missed a payment. Medical bills, paid in full after my surgery. Which part seems beyond me?" Her smile cracked. "You don't need to get defensive. I'm not being defensive. I'm being accurate." You could feel the shift in the air. People around us began whispering. Mrs. Alvarez folded her arms. Mark looked pale. Melissa tried again. "Dad, this isn't an attack. It's protection. You're not as sharp as you used to be." Then, maybe you can help me remember something I said, meeting her eyes. "How many months behind are you on your credit cards?" 3, 4. "And what about the car loan you took out last year? Still paying that off?" She froze. The blood drained from her face. Mark stared at her. "What's he talking about?" "Melissa?" She stammered. "That's irrelevant." "No, I said it's very relevant, because while you're claiming I can't handle my affairs, you're standing here trying to take over mine." For the first time, she couldn't hide the panic. Her voice rose. "This isn't fair. You're twisting everything." I shook my head. No, Melissa, you're the one twisting words into traps. The notary, Agent Cooper, stepped in professionally. Before we proceed, Mr. Harris, do you fully understand what these documents mean? And are you signing them voluntarily? I looked him square in the eye. Oh, I understand them perfectly, I said. And no, I am not. Every head turned. Melissa's confidence evaporated. She tried to grab the papers, but Ryan placed a hand on them first. Ma'am, please don't touch those just yet. That's when she realized something was wrong, something she couldn't control. The backyard was silent, except for the sound of a single bird in the distance. I stood up slowly. Melissa, I said, for months, you've been pretending this was about my safety. But this was never about protecting me. It was about taking everything I have. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. In that moment, every person in that yard saw her for what she was. Not a caring daughter-in-law, but someone who had mistaken kindness for weakness and family for opportunity. The truth was finally out, and the real show hadn't even started yet. For a few long seconds, no one moved. Melissa stood frozen, clutching her purse like it was armor. The crowd stayed silent, eyes darting between her and the man she thought was just a notary. Then the quiet broke. The notary cleared his throat and spoke with the steady confidence of someone used to commanding a room. Mrs. Harris, he said evenly, before we go any further, I need to clarify something. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small leather wallet, and flipped it open. A gold badge glinted in the afternoon sun. I'm Special Agent Ryan Cooper, Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Division. Gasps rippled through the yard. A fork clattered onto a plate. Mrs. Alvarez whispered a prayer under her breath. Melissa's face drained of color. Agent Cooper's tone stayed calm, almost gentle, but every word landed like a hammer. This isn't a family discussion anymore. These documents you brought to be signed power of attorney, transfers, medical authority, property, authorization constitute an attempted act of elder fraud. That's a federal offense. Melissa blinked fast, her voice shaking. This is ridiculous. You can't just... He cut her off firm, but controlled. We can, and we have. For the past 18 months, our division has been investigating a network of real estate fraud targeting elderly homeowners across Colorado. You, Mrs. Harris, are one of the names we've been tracking. The crowd went dead still. You could almost hear the weight of the accusation settle. Mark stepped back from his wife, confusion written all over his face. Melissa, what is he talking about? Agent Cooper reached into his briefcase and unfolded several printed emails, their headers visible under the sunlight. Let's start with this, he said. An email sent from your account to a known associate, dated April 15th. Quote, found another target. Old judge. Recent widower. Heart surgery. House worth 1.2 mil. Should be easy. A collective gasp swept through the guests. Melissa shook her head violently. That's not mine. You can't prove that. Cooper continued without raising his voice. We already did. We traced it through your device ID and IP address. And here's another one. He read the next aloud. Need forged medical evaluation showing dementia. Same doctor template as last time, dated 1 week later. Melissa's hands trembled. She looked around the yard searching for a sympathetic face, but there were none left. Even her husband couldn't meet her eyes. Agent Cooper set the papers down carefully, then looked straight at her. You weren't helping your father-in-law, Mrs. Harris. You were attempting to take control of his assets through deception, false documentation, and coercion. That's wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. You've committed multiple federal crimes. The backyard had become a courtroom, and the truth was delivering its own verdict. I remember standing there, watching the entire scene unfold as if time had slowed. Months of quiet suspicion, of pretending not to see, of waiting. It had all led to this moment. I didn't feel angry anymore, just sad. Sad that someone I had welcomed into my family had turned out to be a predator, hiding behind polite smiles. Melissa's voice broke. You set me up. I looked her in the eye. No, Melissa, you set yourself up. I just documented it. Agent Cooper nodded slightly toward me, then turned back to her. You had every chance to stop. Every time you lied, every time you took another picture, every rumor you spread, you built your own case. And now it's finished. He reached into his bag again this time, pulling out a federal warrant. Melissa Harris, you are under investigation for elder abuse, wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes against a federal retiree. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Melissa tried to speak, but the words came out in fragments, half denial, half disbelief. Mark finally whispered, "Oh, my God." As two plainclothes agents approached from the edge of the yard, the last of Melissa's composure crumbled. The hands that once signed fake documents were now trembling in front of everyone she'd fooled. The neighbors, my family. The people who had believed her story all saw the truth laid bare. Agent Cooper's voice remained calm as he read her rights. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. I stood still listening to every word, not with triumph, but with the quiet satisfaction of justice finally arriving. When they led her toward the waiting car parked down the block, she turned once, her face pale and hollow. This isn't over, she said. I looked at her steadily. Yes, Melissa, it is. And for the first time in months, the house behind me felt safe again. For a few seconds after the badge reveal, no one breathed. The truth was now out in the open, but Melissa still tried to hold herself together. Her voice quivered desperate and defiant. You're all being manipulated. This is a setup, she shouted, but the words rang hollow against the heavy silence that followed. Agent Cooper didn't raise his voice. He simply opened a second folder and placed several documents on the table. Mrs. Harris, we have enough evidence to fill a courtroom, he said. Bank transfers, forged signatures, and phone logs connecting you to two previous victims. Margaret Henderson, age 73, and Eduardo Martinez, 79. Both lost their homes under nearly identical circumstances. Both cases list your name or one of your aliases on the closing paperwork. Melissa's knees gave out slightly, and she grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. That's not true, she muttered. It's not just true, Cooper said quietly. It's documented. He held up photos, images of signed power of attorney papers notarized under false pretenses. We also have surveillance footage of you signing Margaret Henderson's name at Commerce Bank, and handwriting analysis confirming the forgery. Her denial cracked into a whisper. No, you can't prove Melissa, I said, interrupting softly. Don't make this worse. You built this entire scheme on deceit, and now it's falling apart because the truth always does one thing: it rises. The crowd stayed frozen, absorbing every word. Mrs. Alvarez covered her mouth. A few neighbors exchanged stunned glances. Agent Cooper went on methodical and precise. We've also uncovered your gambling debts, 3 different illegal bookmakers, totaling $83,000. Those debts started your involvement in this ring. You needed quick money, and elderly homeowners became your victims. That broke her composure completely. I just needed time, she screamed. I was going to pay it back. Cooper shook his head. That's not how federal law works. Then he turned to my son Mark. Mr. Harris, I know this is difficult, but you should understand, your wife used your name in several transactions. You are not a suspect, but your identity was compromised. Our team will help you clear your records. Mark looked shattered. His voice barely came out. She used my name. Yes, Cooper said gently. You're a victim, too. Mark stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. 3 years, he whispered. 3 years you've been doing this. All those late nights, all those clients, it was lies. Melissa turned toward him, eyes wild. I did it for us, Mark, for our future. No, he said quietly. You did it for yourself. The words landed harder than any accusation. Melissa collapsed back into her chair, hands shaking. Agent Cooper gave a brief signal toward the fence, and 2 plainclothes agents stepped forward. They approached calmly but firmly. Melissa Harris, one of them, said you are under arrest for elder fraud, wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Cooper continued reading her rights with the same even tone he'd had all along. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. Anything you say can and will be used against you in federal court. When the agents pulled out the handcuffs, the metallic click seemed to echo through the entire yard. No one cheered. No one spoke. It wasn't a moment for celebration. It was the kind of justice that feels heavy because it costs something. As they led her toward the unmarked SUV parked just down the street, Melissa turned her head, once her face pale and hollow. Edward, she said, please, don't let them take me like this. I stood there, steady but sad. Melissa, you took yourself, I said. All we did was stop you. The agents guided her into the car, shut the door, and drove away. The crowd remained silent until the sound of the engine faded. Then quietly, Mark said what everyone was thinking. I didn't just lose a wife today, he whispered. I lost the illusion of who she was. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Son, the truth hurts, but it also heals. You'll start again. We both will. As the evening sun dipped behind the trees, the smell of cooling barbecue still lingered in the air. But everything felt different now. Cleaner, clearer, lighter. The predators were gone, and justice, for once, had come home. By the next morning, the story had already moved beyond my backyard. Melissa wasn't just a daughter-in-law with bad intentions anymore. She was now federal custody property. The FBI processed her at the Denver Detention Center, and within hours, a magistrate denied her bail. Too many risks, too many victims, too much evidence. Agent Cooper called that afternoon. His tone was professional, but I could hear the quiet satisfaction in his voice. Judge Harris, he said you did more than protect your own home. You cracked open a network we've been chasing for almost 2 years. He explained that Melissa's arrest had triggered a chain reaction. As soon as the story hit the system, the FBI tip line lit up. Calls came from all over the state. Elderly homeowners reporting suspicious relatives' sudden requests for power of attorney, forged signatures they hadn't understood until now. Many of them described the same tactics, the same fake compassion Melissa had used. By the end of that week, 47 confirmed victims had been identified, and more names kept coming in. The fraud ring had stolen over $2 million in assets from people who'd spent their lives working for security, only to have it taken from them by those pretending to help. Cooper's team had already frozen several accounts and recovered nearly half the money. It wasn't just the money, though. Each victim represented a family, fractured by betrayal, a parent tricked by their own child, a grandparent made to feel incompetent, a neighbor convinced they'd lost their mind. The cruelty of it wasn't in the theft itself, but in the erosion of trust. Cooper told me they were preparing coordinated arrests across the state. 6 suspects tied to Melissa's network would be taken in before sunrise Monday. "We wanted to make sure none of them can warn the others," he said. "You set the timing perfectly." That hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't used to thinking of myself as the one setting traps or breaking cases. For decades, I'd been the man behind the bench interpreting the law, not executing it. But this time, I'd been in the middle of it, and somehow it felt right. As for Mark, the days that followed were heavy. I watched him move through guilt and disbelief like a man trying to wake from a bad dream. Cooper and his team met with him privately to clear his name. They walked him through each forged document and explained how Melissa had used his identity without consent. "You were never part of this," Cooper assured him. "She used your name to make her frauds look legitimate. We'll make sure your credit and records are restored." Still, I could see the pain in Mark's face. Betrayal doesn't vanish with paperwork. It lingers, reshaping how you see the people you once loved. I told him something I've told many witnesses over the years. When trust is broken, the only way forward is to rebuild it with truth. Slowly, one honest act at a time. Meanwhile, my neighborhood had transformed. What started as a cookout had become the center of a federal operation, and people were still processing it. Mrs. Alvarez dropped by with a pie and said, "Edward, you made us all a little safer." I smiled, but what she said wasn't entirely true. I hadn't made them safer. The truth had. That week, I sat with Cooper and reviewed the files that had come in. The names blurred together after a while, but the patterns didn't. Each case began the same way: loss, illness, loneliness. Every predator in that network had looked for the same opening vulnerability disguised as aging. It was chilling, but also clarifying. Evil rarely comes in through the front door. It comes disguised as kindness, as concern, as help you didn't ask for. Before hanging up, Cooper said, "We'll be conducting simultaneous raids Monday at dawn. With luck, this will shut down one of the biggest elder fraud rings in the region." "Luck has nothing to do with it," I said. "You built this case with patience and proof. That's justice, not luck." He laughed quietly. "You sound like you're back on the bench, Judge. Maybe I never really left." I told him when I hung up the house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't empty. For the first time since Margaret's passing, I felt purpose breathing through those walls again. Melissa's arrest wasn't just closure, it was a reminder. Every time someone stands up to deception, no matter their age, it sends a message. We may slow down, but we don't surrender. Justice doesn't retire. It just finds new cases to fight. The trial didn't take long. Cases built on lies, tend to collapse quickly when confronted with truth. The courtroom was the same one where I had presided over hundreds of verdicts in my career, but this time I sat on the opposite side not as the judge but as a witness. It was strange at first walking through those doors again, seeing the seal of the United States above the bench. The smell of old wood and polished brass hit me like memory and irony all at once. Melissa sat at the defense table wearing a plain gray suit that couldn't hide the emptiness behind her eyes. Gone was the confident woman who used to lecture me about my confusion. Gone was the smug smile that thought she could outsmart a retired federal judge. What sat before me was just another con artist stripped of her illusions. The prosecution didn't waste time. Agent Cooper presented the evidence with the precision of a man who'd spent months piecing together a perfect puzzle. The recordings, the emails, the bank transfers, each one tightened the circle. He read the words that had started it all, found another target. Old judge, recent widower, heart surgery, house worth 1.2 mil. Should be easy. You could feel the room react. A few jurors shifted uncomfortably. Some shook their heads. That single sentence summed up the cruelty of her scheme more than any speech could. When it was my turn to testify, I kept it simple. I told the truth the same way I'd always expected it from others. I described the first red flags, the photos, the insinuations, the fake concern. I explained how grief and recovery can make even the strongest person seem vulnerable, and how predators know that better than anyone. I wasn't there to seek vengeance. I was there to remind the court that manipulation of trust is a form of violence, too. The defense tried to paint Melissa as desperate, not dangerous. They said her gambling debts drove her into bad decisions. They tried to appeal to pity. But there was no pity left in that room, not after hearing the testimony of other victims, elderly people who had lost everything because someone smiled while stealing from them. The jury deliberated for just 90 minutes. When they came back, the foreman's voice was steady, guilty on all counts. Melissa didn't look up. She just stared at the table, her face pale and hollow. Then came the sentencing. Judge Patricia Martinez, a woman I had mentored early in her career, presided over the case. Her words were measured but powerful, the kind that stay with you long after the gavel drops. Mrs. Harris, she began. You preyed upon the elderly during moments of grief and vulnerability. You stole not just money, but dignity, peace, and trust, things no court can replace. Crimes against the elderly are not only financial in nature. They are moral crimes cutting to the core of human decency. Her sentence was firm, 22 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release and full restitution to all victims. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of the clerk recording the judgment. As the guards led Melissa away, she turned briefly toward me, but there was nothing left to say. Her eyes held the weight of someone realizing too late that every shortcut eventually becomes a dead end. Afterward, as I stepped out into the crisp Denver air, the courthouse that had once been my second home felt different. It wasn't just a place of law anymore. It was a place of closure. Justice hadn't come quickly, but it had come completely. That day, I thought about all the people who'd ever doubted their instincts. When something felt wrong, every elderly man or woman told they were forgetful when they were really being gaslit. Melissa's conviction wasn't just her ending. It was their warning and hopefully their protection. Judge Martinez's closing words echoed in my head as I walked down the courthouse steps. A society is measured by how it protects those who can no longer protect themselves. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd done my part again, not from behind the bench, but from the heart. After the sentencing, life slowed down again, but not in the same quiet, lonely way it had before. The house that once felt like an echo of loss now felt alive again. The air carried a sense of renewal, a kind of second chance that doesn't come from winning, but from surviving with your integrity intact. For weeks after the trial, letters poured in. Some were from people I'd never met, sons and daughters, thanking me for speaking out, elderly folks sharing their own close calls with family scams. Others were from organizations asking for advice on how to protect seniors from similar crimes. That was when I realized something important. What happened to me wasn't just my story. It was a mirror reflecting what's happening to thousands of others across the country. Agent Cooper visited again this time, not as an investigator, but as a colleague. He told me the Bureau was forming a new Elder Fraud Task Force, a team that would combine law enforcement, retired judges, financial experts, and elder advocates. They wanted me to join as a consultant. Not full-time, he said, but enough to help identify patterns, review case strategies, and teach investigators how to spot manipulation before it turns into a crime. I didn't hesitate. I'd spent my career sentencing criminals. Now I had a chance to prevent people from becoming victims in the first place. It felt like rediscovering purpose. Only this time it was deeply personal. We held workshops across the state libraries, senior centers, church halls. I'd stand at the front of the room and tell my story, not with shame, but with conviction. I'd show them what to watch for sudden interest in a parent's finances, pressure to sign legal documents, the quiet erosion of confidence that comes before exploitation. Each time I saw recognition in their eyes, the kind that says, "I've seen that before, and now I know what it means." The neighborhood changed too. People started checking in on each other more. Mrs. Alvarez started a senior safety circle, where retirees met once a week to talk about everything from home repair scams to fake insurance calls. The Millers, who lived across the street, helped their parents review their wills and bank accounts. It wasn't fear that bonded us, it was awareness. Even my grandson Tommy became something of a local hero. At 10 years old, he took it upon himself to remind every adult he met, "Don't sign anything without Grandpa Edward looking at it first." He started handing out flyers at community events with the words, "Think before you trust. Ask before you sign." His school invited me to speak about honesty and critical thinking, and watching those kids listen so intently reminded me that prevention starts young. One afternoon, Tommy asked Grandpa, "Are there still bad people like Melissa out there?" "Yes, buddy," I told him, "but now there are more people who know how to stop them." He smiled and said, "Then we're winning." And maybe we were. Not because we caught every criminal, but because we were changing how people thought, turning silence into action, shame into education, fear into strength. A year after the case, the Elder Fraud Task Force reported that we had prevented nearly $15 million in scams and educated over 5,000 seniors across Colorado. But numbers weren't what mattered most. What mattered were the stories we stopped before they began. The widower who recognized a fake loan form, the grandmother who refused to sign away her property, the neighbor who made one phone call that saved someone's life savings. These days, when I sit on my porch watching the sunset over the same maple tree Margaret and I planted 40 years ago, I feel at peace. I've learned that justice isn't only about punishment, it's about protection. And wisdom, when shared, becomes the best kind of legacy. Tommy still visits every weekend, sometimes with cookies, sometimes just to talk. Before he leaves, he always says, "Grandpa, no one's going to trick our family, right?" I smile and pat his shoulder. Not as long as we keep paying attention. Because that's the truth I've come to understand. Growing older doesn't mean becoming weaker. It means carrying more experience, more clarity, and a deeper duty to pass it on. And if sharing my story helps even one person see a lie before it takes root, then every painful moment was worth it. When the dust finally settled and the headlines faded, people began asking me one question over and over. What should I do if something like this happens to me? The answer isn't complicated, but it does require awareness, the kind that protects you long before the scam begins. So here's what I've learned, and what I tell everyone now, from church groups to senior centers, to anyone with aging parents or grandparents who might one day face the same kind of manipulation I did. First, never sign a power of attorney or any major document right after an illness or surgery. Those are the moments when you're tired, emotional, and grateful to anyone who offers to help. That's when predators strike not because you're weak, but because you're human. Take time to recover first. Delay is protection. Second, always get an independent medical evaluation before agreeing to any legal transfer of authority. If someone, even a relative, suggests you're confused or not thinking clearly, don't argue. Instead, schedule a cognitive test with your own doctor, one who has no ties to the person making the claim. A clean, professional evaluation can shut down false accusations before they become legal weapons. Third, document everything. Keep a journal. Record your conversations. If it's legal in your state, save every text and email. You don't need to be paranoid. You just need to be prepared. In Colorado, for instance, one-party consent laws allow you to record conversations you're part of, and that evidence saved my home. Fourth, create witnesses before you ever need them. If someone brings a notary or legal document to your home, call a neighbor or a family friend to be present. Real love doesn't mind an audience. Con artists do. The presence of a witness changes everything. It adds accountability where manipulation usually thrives. And finally, report any pressure or coercion immediately. Whether it's the FBI Adult Protective Services or your local law enforcement, there are units that specialize in elder fraud and financial abuse. They take it seriously, even if you're not sure a crime has occurred yet. Early reporting can save you and others from becoming victims. Most people think scams come from strangers, phone calls, phishing emails, tech support cons. But the truth is, the most dangerous scams often come from people you trust. They know your routines, your vulnerabilities, your history. That's what makes them powerful, and why speaking up feels so hard. But silence is exactly what they rely on. So talk, ask questions, seek advice. Let your loved ones help you check documents before signing. There's no shame in being cautious, only strength in being smart. I tell my grandson this every time he visits. The world isn't divided into good and bad people. It's divided into honest ones, and those who think no one's watching. And then he laughs and says, "That's why we always watch right." Grandpa. Exactly. because trust is sacred, but verification is survival. If you remember nothing else from my story, remember this: you are never too old, too kind, or too trusting to protect yourself. Ask the questions others are too afraid to ask. Pause before signing. And if something feels wrong, don't explain it away. That uneasy feeling might just be your wisdom trying to save you. That's what I learned the hard way. I hope you don't have to. When I first decided to share my story, I didn't plan for it to reach so many people. But as the messages and letters started coming in, I realized something powerful. Every family has its own version of a Melissa. Every neighborhood has someone quietly wondering if they're being taken advantage of, someone afraid to speak up because it's family. If that's you or someone you love, listen closely. You are not alone, and you are not powerless. Fraud doesn't always wear a stranger's face. Sometimes it comes wrapped in concern and offers to help manage things in words like safety and protection that mask a much darker intent. It happens in hospitals, in living rooms, in quiet kitchens after long recoveries, and it can happen faster than you think. That's why this story isn't just about me. It's about awareness. It's about arming yourself with the right questions before someone hands you a pen. If you found this helpful, stay with me, because in Part 2, I'll share the 3 warning signs that a power of attorney is being abused, and how you can recognize them before it's too late. In the meantime, ask yourself this: have you ever been pressured to sign something for the good of the family? Maybe it was framed as kindness or practicality or convenience, but deep down, something felt off. That moment of hesitation, that instinct, is your best defense. Don't ignore it. Trust it. Then verify everything. I've put together a free checklist for preventing signature scams. It's in the video description below. It walks you through the exact steps I took to protect myself from confirming notaries to documenting every conversation. Print it out, keep it close, and share it with someone you love. Because knowledge only matters when it spreads. If my story made you think, share it. Someone out there might need this reminder right now, before the wrong person shows up with the right paperwork. And if you take one thing from all of this, let it be this: you don't need to be a judge to stand up for yourself. You just need to pay attention. So, tell me in the comments, have you ever faced pressure to sign something you weren't sure about? I read every message, and your story might be the one that helps someone else find their voice. Together we can make sure what happened to me never happens to another family again.